Hey everyone, welcome to this week's author reading of Rune Marked. We'll be reading chapters 5 and 6 this week. And of course, pdmac is here with me. And we will just jump in and continue from last week. So, chapter 5, Gwen. Gwen was relieved when Emil said that they would wait until nightfall to escape. Her blistered feet were sore and she needed to rest. The guards opened the doors, and a young elven girl entered, carrying a tray of fresh fruits, cheeses, a loaf of bread, and some wooden plates. Kirith played host and divvied up the food onto the plates, then handed them to Gwen and Emil. Is this a snack? Gwen asked. No, it's dinner time here, and even prisoners get fed. This is what elves eat for dinner? There's no meat. Gwen didn't mind fruit and cheese, but she needed something more filling to sate her hunger. We don't eat meat, not unless there are no other options, Kirith said. What? Why not? We are one with the life forces around us, and we do not believe in taking another life unnecessarily. Gwen found that perspective entirely foreign and didn't know what to say, so she kept quiet and ate. She looked around the room while she chewed, admiring the beauty of it. It didn't take long for her to realize that elves put intricate details into everything. Even the chairs they sat in had animals carved into the wood. You said this room is for visiting nobles, Gwen said. How many elven cities are there? Only a handful, Kirith answered, though there are many small communities across Olivale. Gwen plucked a few grapes from a stem and popped them into her mouth. They were perfectly ripe and flooded her mouth with sweet juices that excited her taste buds. Despite that, she was thirsty and wondered why the elven girl had neglected to bring something to drink. I need water, she said, looking at Kirith questioningly. My apologies, he replied. I'm being a forgetful host. He rose from his chair and walked to a small table that had a silver pitcher and wooden cups. Kirith filled 3 of the cups and delivered 2 of them to Gwen and Emil. Gwen drank deeply of the water. The cool liquid slicked her throat, and she immediately felt more rejuvenated than she had in weeks. Her surprise was etched upon her face, causing Kirith to smile at her. The waters of the Thaestra River bring healing, he said. This water is magical? Gwen asked, peering into the cup. It looked normal to her. Call it magic or the power of nature, Kirith said. We care for the river, and it cares for us. I'd forgotten about the river, Emil said. I've heard that people who bathe in the water experience miracles. Not all who have, but there are many with such stories. We elves are used to the water, so we do not notice the difference as much. Would you like to bathe in it? There is a tub in the corner there. Kirith nodded toward the corner of the room. How do you get the water up here? Gwen asked. Much of the Thaestra flows underground, but magic directs it into the trees through hollowed roots. The water flows continuously, keeping the bathing tubes fresh. Try it, Kirith motioned. It will soothe your pains. I don't want to get my clothes wet, especially if we're going to scale down the tree, Gwen replied. She was curious, though. Then remove them. Gwen gave Kirith an odd look. He'd said that so casually, as if it wouldn't be awkward for her to disrobe in front of him. He was a complete stranger. Elves do not view nakedness the same way we do, Emil said, as though reading her mind. She stood and walked over to the tub, then removed her clothes and stepped into the water. Gwen averted her gaze too late and caught a glimpse of Emil's backside, but she had practically seen the woman naked before when she had chosen her wound from Emil's body. Still, it was embarrassing to Gwen. Go, Kirith encouraged. I can sense your exhaustion. The water will help. He seemed sincere, but Gwen wasn't sure if he was just trying to get her naked. Her feet cried out for relief, and she finally relented and went to the tub. She cast a glance at Kirith, but he wasn't looking at her. She hurriedly removed her clothes and climbed into the tub, sinking below the moving water. The temperature was neither hot nor cold, but a perfect balance between the two, and she sighed in relief. The throbbing in her feet and the ache of her muscles dulled until she didn't feel weary at all. That's incredible, Gwen said. I feel perfect. The stories I've heard don't do it justice, Emil said. She leaned back and stretched out with a groan. The tub was large enough to hold at least 4 people comfortably. Gwen decided if all elven nobles had baths like this one, they were blessed beyond measure. She looked up at Kirith as he approached the tub. He removed his shirt, and Gwen's eyes widened. What are you doing? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Partaking of the waters, he said simply. Gwen turned her gaze as Kirith removed his boots and stripped his pants off, then joined them in the tub. She swallowed hard and moved away. Elves might view nakedness differently, but Gwen didn't. The 3 of them sat silently. Gwen felt awkward, but Emil and Kirith were relaxed as if they weren't all naked in front of each other. The message you have for Lyra. What is it about? Kirith asked. I'm not sure, Gwen replied, glad to have a distraction. My friend just asked me to deliver it to her. He said she was an ally to the rebellion. She is, Kirith confirmed. Support among my people grows for her daily, but my father ignores her warnings. He would be wise to heed her words before it's too late. Gwen found Kirith's last few words odd, but Kirith's tone didn't imply anything ill. She looked toward the balcony and saw that the sun had almost descended. The patches of sky that were visible through the trees were vibrant orange. It's almost time to go, Gwen said. A little longer, Emil replied. She moved closer to Kirith and ran her fingers through his hair, tucking the long strands behind his pointed ear. Kirith looked at Emil in the eyes, and Gwen felt even more awkward than before. She moved past them and got out of the tub, feeling self-conscious about her body. A glance over her shoulder revealed that Kirith and Emil weren't even paying her any attention. Gwen looked around for something to dry off with and found a long strip of cloth hanging on the wall near the tub. She grabbed it and dried off, then put her clothes back on. They were dirty, but she didn't care. Her eyes widened when she heard the sounds of lovemaking and hurried to the balcony, trying to get as far away from the sound as possible. She peered over the railing and eyed the descent. The ground was far below, and the thought of scaling down the tree caused a flutter in Gwen's stomach. It seemed like an impossible distance. And what if she fell? Gwen chewed her bottom lip in worry. She noticed the moans from the tub had stopped, but she didn't dare to turn to look. Emil joined her at the balcony, and Gwen was relieved to see the woman was dressed. What was that about? Gwen whispered harshly. I was clearing my head before we do this, Emil replied. And don't act like you don't have needs. Gwen ignored the comment and continued to peer down at the ground. Darkness had settled across the landscape, obscuring the view. Gwen's heart fluttered in her chest. Are you sure this is a good idea? Not really, Emil replied, but what other option do we have? Unless we can find a way to get these shackles off, I don't see how we're going to get out of here. Besides, you have to get that letter to Lyra. I don't think Belial is willingly going to let you give it to her. The woman had valid points. Gwen breathed in deeply several times, trying to calm her pounding heart. Let's get this over with, then. Emil went first, tossing one leg over the railing. She adjusted her grip, and the other leg followed. Then she began a slow descent along the tree. Kirith stepped onto the balcony, and Gwen's cheeks flushed. He didn't seem to notice or didn't care, and he motioned after Emil. Do you want to go next? Yes, she replied quickly, then climbed over the railing. Gwen locked eyes with Kirith for a moment, and she could feel her face burning. She tried not to think about his muscled, unclothed body and failed. Focus, she scolded herself. She crept down the tree much slower than Emil. Her footing was the hardest part, since she couldn't see where to place her feet, and her upper body strength was almost non-existent. Gwen struggled the entire way, scaring herself a few times when she slipped. After what she felt was an eternity, her feet touched the ground. Took you long enough, Emil said, though she was smiling. Kirith stood next to her, and Gwen scrunched her eyebrows, trying to figure out how he'd beaten her down without her notice. Where are we going? Gwen asked, brushing her hands off on her thighs. Lyra is usually at the temple at sunset, so we'll look for her there first, Kirith said. What about guards? Emil looked around as if expecting a host of them to close in upon them at any moment. There aren't many at night. Since my father doesn't believe there are any threats to our safety, their numbers are minimal. We'll keep to the shadows regardless, just to be safe. Kirith led them along a worn path, weaving among the trees. Gwen expected to see a few elves, but the night was quiet and no one else was out. They skirted along the edge of the forest city, and Gwen bit back a gasp when she'd stepped too close to the border. The bracelet had grown hot against her skin, catching her by surprise. Watch your steps, Kirith said. If you cross over the border, pain will be the last thing you know before you die. Gwen was bothered by how nonchalantly he said that. How often did people get shackled? And how often did they die from trying to escape? She shuddered at the thought and intentionally kept a wider distance from the invisible border of the city. A well-lit clearing was ahead, and Kirith slowed its steps. They kept hidden in the shadows, and he whistled a few notes, the sound disguised as a bird call. A moment later, the same whistle echoed back. It's safe, Kirith said. He led them into the clearing, and Gwen saw 2 elven guards standing at either side of the temple archway. Her heart skipped a beat, and she was about to sprint in the opposite direction when they bowed low to Kirith. My lord, they greeted in unison. Good evening, Kirith replied, offering a tilt of his head. The city seems clear tonight. Quiet as a den of foxes, one of the guards said. Kirith looked over her shoulder at Gwen and Emil and motioned them to follow him inside. Gwen looked up at the temple, surprised that it too was built within a tree. She foolishly expected a building of stone with columns. The interior of the tree was bright, and the walls were inscribed with designs just as detailed as the ones in the palace. Pews lined the room on either side, while a walkway stretched down the middle. The pews were formed from the tree itself and radiated magic that Gwen could feel even through her shackle. A few elves were present, their heads bowed. The place exuded peace, and Gwen's worries were washed away in a wave of tranquility. What deity is this temple for? Gwen whispered. Solara, Kirith answered, goddess of the stars. Gwen looked past him to where a large dragon statue resided. It sat upon a raised dais, a foot above the rest of the floor. Its wings were spread wide, each several feet long. The scaly body of the creature twisted back and forth from its head down to the tip of its tail. Kneeling in front of it was an elven woman. Kirith led them along the walkway and stopped a few feet behind the woman. They waited in silence until she finished her prayer, then she stood and turned to face them. Prince Kirith, she greeted warmly. Lyra, Kirith said, this is Emil and Gwen. Lyra's slender brow rose curiously. How did you get humans into Olaville without your father knowing? He knows, Kirith replied, pointing to the bracelets on Emil's arms. Of course he does, Lyra said, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Gwen studied the woman intently. There was something about her that seemed off, but she didn't know what it was. She was an elf, as tall as Kirith, and just as beautiful in appearance. Her hair was golden brown, and it reached down past her waist in a long, elaborate braid. Her eyes were green, but they held a fierceness that Gwen found intimidating. Despite that, her voice was soft and melodic, adding to the calm atmosphere of the temple. Gwen has a message for you from a friend of hers, he added. Lyra looked at Gwen expectantly. Who sent this message? Gwen cleared her throat. It's from Eridor. There was an entire speech she had prepared, but the words disappeared from her mind. She retrieved the skull case and fumbled with it, then handed it to Lyra. The elf opened it and unrolled the parchment, her eyes scanning over what was written. She lowered the parchment and looked at Kirith. If your father knows they are here, why did he let them come to me? He doesn't know we're here. We snuck out of the palace. Clever. I assume there will be a trial? Yes, tomorrow morning, Kirith replied. That is good. Take them back to the palace and ensure that they are present for the trial. Gwen heard their conversation, but she wasn't listening. She was focused on Lyra. There was something there. Lyra's aspect. It wasn't green like the other elves. It was silver. She tried to get Emil's attention, but the woman wasn't looking at her. Are you sure? The nobles will say they're guilty. I am sure, Lyra said. Kirith was conflicted. I promised them I would make things right. I don't want them to be executed. They won't be, Lyra replied. How do you know? It's time. Time for what? Kirith asked. It's time to implement our plan.
Chapter 6. Connell. Riding beside Brioc, Connell inhaled the scent of pine forest, a fragrance that always filled him with peace. Behind him, Galadir and Toigrith engaged in friendly antagonism as to who were better carvers, elves or dwarves. The rest of the company rode two abreast, tailing behind them. I've been wondering, Connell said, looking over at Brioc, when we were in Morindir and you and Drustin were looking at the rune boxes, you nearly fainted when you saw one of the bones in the box. Then when we packed all of them onto the wagon to take back to Monkreth, you kept that box separate, carrying it yourself. Why? Brioc's placid face hardened. They were dangerous. Aren't all rune bones dangerous in some form or another? You said so yourself. These were especially dangerous, evil. His jaw clenched and his nostrils flared. Startled at his intensity, Connell asked, what were they? Brioc paused before he replied, Dragonlock runes. Dragonlock? What do they do? Lips pursed, Brioc inhaled an angry breath. They bind a dragon to an individual, one consumed with evil, for no one of noble heart would ever bind a dragon to himself. Connell furrowed his brow, wondering why Brioc was so angry. It's not like they can be ever used. Don't be a fool, Brioc snapped. What's your problem? Connell shot back. How many dragons have you seen in your lifetime? Show me a dragon and maybe I'll worry about it. Until then, let's remain focused on the job at hand. Besides, did you burn those rune boxes? That's not the point, Brioc retorted. Someone had those rune bones carved. Someone with deep knowledge of magic. Someone who could ruin your chances of reclaiming a kingdom. That alone should worry you. Huh? Like who? How should I know? But if there are dragon lock bones, trust me, there are worse ones already carved. Connell suddenly realized the glaring flaw in his quest. If he could use magic, so could the enemy. Truth was, he hadn't given it much thought, assuming that Briac or Drewston would counter anything used against them. Ever since he was imbued with his extraordinary strength and other traits, he'd begun to feel invincible. And now he wasn't so sure. Giving voice to his thoughts, he said, "So you and Drewston are going to need help if we defeat Torian and his wizards. Drewston and I are half wizards, remember? Which means that we only have half the power of a true wizard or mage. But we are not without resources, for we have friends who more than make up for our limited capabilities." Connell rode in silence for a bit, smiling at the ongoing debate behind him. Torgwith had scored an advantage when Galadir admitted that no one carved stone like a dwarf, but quickly added that elves were without equal when it came to wood carving, causing Torgwith to begrudgingly admit that elves were mighty fine wood carvers, possibly among the best. Finally, an idea blossomed, and he gazed over at Briac. "Can I learn magic?" Briac shook his head. "It doesn't work that way. You either have the gift or you don't. Remember what I said back in Moncrith. Only individuals who are image marked or mage marked can use rune bones, and being mage marked doesn't necessarily mean you are a mage." "How do I know that I'm not a mage if I'm never taught how to be one?" Briac narrowed his gaze at him. "When you look at me, what do you see? Huh? What do you see when you look at me?" Puzzled, Connell studied the man riding next to him and shrugged. "I see a half-druid named Briac, with his reddish-brown hair tied behind his head." He purposely left off the handsome part, not wanting to inflate the man's vanity. "What about colors?" "Colors? Yes, do you see any color?" "Of course I see color," Connell indignantly replied. "I can see the color of your hair, the color of your clothes, even the color of the horse you're riding on. What does that have to do with anything?" Briac nodded with satisfaction. "You are not a mage, nor a wizard, and will never become one." How do you know?" Connell snapped, insulted by the curt dismissal. "Do not be offended," Briac soothed. "In fact, be thankful. Being a mage or wizard isn't without its problems. No matter how hard you try, once people find out you're a mage, people treat you differently, at arm's length, never trusting you. They call upon you when they need something. They want nothing to do with you once they get what they want. You are different. You are not meant to be a mage. You are meant to rule." Assuaged at the backhanded compliment, Connell mulled a certain future. Casting a sly look at Briac, he quietly said, "Have you really seen a dragon?" "Yes," he answered, looking over his shoulder to check that no one else heard the conversation. Leaning over towards him, his voice low, so that only Connell could hear, he said, "There's one not too far away. If we are close enough when we stop for the night, I will take you to him." Connell's heart skipped a beat. "Really?" "Shh, not so loud." Briac grimaced, "And yes, really." "What's he like?" "I think it best we drop the subject for the moment," Briac cautioned, settling back in his saddle. "There will be enough time tonight to answer your questions." Frustrated at the reply, Connell changed topics to divert his own distraction. "Are there other runes that would be good for me to have?" "Most runes deal in the physical realm, like increasing strength or stamina, or special weapon abilities. Thus, if you want to add to the abilities you have now, you need to think in terms of the physical. What other physical skills would you want?" Connell pondered only a moment. "I was thinking along the lines of what would a cobra need? Things like stealth, maybe knowledge of poison, stuff like that." "Stealth is possible," Briac replied, "but knowledge of poisons is something you'll have to learn yourself. Remember, the restrictions concerning the physical." "But you said most," Connell countered. "I know where you're going with this," Briac objected, holding a hand up. "Making the leap to the spirit world requires the person to be some type of magician, like a mage or wizard. That's why the dragonlock rune bones are so dangerous." "Because only a mage can use them?" "Only a very powerful mage," Briac corrected. Connell frowned. So why were they in Morindir? All Havard had was his voice. Once that was taken away, he was nothing. I know, Brack said, slowly nodding. That's what concerns me. Why would someone put such powerful rune bones there? Maybe they thought it was a safe place, away from prying eyes, Connell offered. Hey, you two, Torgoth called out. We need an unbiased judge. Who's the better carver, elves or dwarves? They're both good, Connell replied without thinking. Torgoth snorted a laugh and leaned towards Galadir. That's what my mom used to say when me and Baldur brought carvings to her to tell us which one was the best. Never did choose a winner. Stopped asking after a while. That's because you both carve in different media, Connell explained. To make a value judgment, we needed to see a stone carving by an elf and a wood carving by a dwarf. Then we would judge fairly. That was profound, Torgoth teased. I'm impressed. Ignoring him, Connell asked Briak, where should we spend the night? About halfway to Denhelm, near the ruins of Glaston, Briak replied, understanding the reason for the question. At this pace, we should get there after dark. We need to pick up the pace then, Connell suggested. Your call, Briak replied. Increasing the pace to a trot and taking occasional rest, they arrived at the outskirts of the ruins in the late afternoon. Connell was more than ready to get off the saddle. We camp here tonight, he announced. Here? Several voices nervously complained. Here, Maldwick asserted. Where do you want to set up, boss? You decide, Maldwick, Connell answered, sitting on his horse, surveying the ruins of what had once been a thriving city. Centuries of war had ravaged the city. Lichen and ivy covered the walls, broken in places, a testament to the battered rams and trebuchet stone missiles. The gates, ripped from their hinges, lay inside the barbican. Weeds and trees had reclaimed much of the city streets and parks. Their present residents consisted of rodents, coyotes, and the occasional bear. When the last assault had slaughtered the remaining living defenders and citizens, the city was pronounced cursed. Stories grew of the dead and roaming around the houses of the castle, unsettled and unable to find rest. Though dismissing the stories as fabled imagination, the place still gave Connell the creeps. It's still a little bit of a ride, Briak quietly relayed. Maldwick, Connell called out to subordinate. Yes, boss? Maldwick guided his horse to come alongside him. Briak and I have some business to attend to. We'll be back after it's dark. Don't worry, he added, seeing doubt in the man's face. Briak's a druid. We'll be safe. Okay, boss. Where are we setting up? In the Barbican. It's big enough for us all and gives us better protection. Fine. See you in a bit. Take this. Maldwick handed him a short sword encased in leather scabbard. I had it as an extra. Figured you might need it. Thank you, Maldwick. He buckled the sword around his waist. Give the company a name. Something strong and noble. Something like Maldwick's Marauders. That has a punch to it. But you're the boss, he countered, though flattered with the suggested name. Only for a little while. Besides, I have bigger plans in mind. I'll be back shortly. While Maldwick reined his horse around to give instructions to the company, Torgoth piped up, where are you going? We have some things to discuss, Briak answered, giving Galadir a knowing look, receiving a nod of understanding in return. You can't discuss them here? Torgoth cocked an eyebrow. Galadir placed a gentle hand on the dwarf's shoulder. It is something that needs to be discussed far enough away from prying ears. Torgoth twisted his head to give him a curious stare. How do you know? I don't, he blandly replied, but I trust them enough not to interfere. Torgoth blinked at the revelation and grinned. Point noted. Guess I'd better find a place to settle before all these thieves get all the good spots. Come along, elf. I've got an extra leaf if you got a pipe. Connell followed Briak as the druid rode the edges of the city walls to the northeast, where the heavily forested mountains rose, and then onto a little-used path that snaked its way through the evergreens and hardwoods, repeatedly curling back on itself as it ascended. Can you tell me anything about the dragon? Connell finally asked, his curiosity bursting. His name is Crag, Briak answered. Crag the Patient One, or sometimes Crag the Wise, though now he is merely Crag. He's a forest dragon. Forest dragon? How many kinds are there? At one time, there were many, Briac explained, a great melancholy in his voice, all different sizes. Some were small, the size of a large draft horse. Others were large, like mountain dragons, and some even larger, like rock dragons. So how big is a forest dragon? You will see when you meet him. What's he like? Breck frowned and thought. He can be gruff at times, but you have to understand all that he has seen, all that he has endured. Do you think you'll help us? That will be up to you to convince him. Me? Connell blurted. Why me? Because you are the king's son. If I think about it, I would not mention that you bear the cobra band, at least not yet. Why not? Remember the prophecy? The eagle will bear the viper in the claws. Yet from the west, a cobra will rise and strike down the eagle, Connell intoned. Yes, I remember, so what? So let's just keep quiet about that for now, shall we? Briac sternly replied. Why? Briac heaved a long-suffering sigh. Because the cobra part implies that the vipers or the king's children would be dominated by the cobra. No, it doesn't, Connell argued. All it says is that the cobra will strike down the eagle. It says nothing about ruling or anything else. Briac flipped an impatient hand at him. You just don't understand. What's to understand? And how do you even know this prophecy is about me and Torian? Connell said with a dismissive shake of his head. Can we just drop it for now? Briac snapped. Just don't mention it, okay? Okay, mum's the word. Silence ruled for a few minutes before Connell asked, what else can you tell me about him? Be respectful when you talk to him. Though you are a king's son, he too is royalty, a prince at one time. And remember, we need his help. Why? How can he help if he's spending his life hiding? Briac shot him a look of irritation. He is waiting, like the few remaining survivors, for a true king to rise up, one that will establish peace, a peace where dragons are free to live without fear of being hunted. Connell pondered the answer. Seems to me you're putting a lot of faith into a tiny fraction of our effort. Dragons have been hiding because they've been hunted almost to extinction. And now you think they're going to want to help us? Briac jerked his horse to a halt. Do you want to see this dragon or not? I have half a mind to turn around and not waste my time. He thrust a finger at Connell. Dragons were hunted to near extinction because no one saw any need for them. It's hard to stay alive when everyone is out to kill you. Would you feel the same way if humans were the target of extermination? Connell held his hands up in defeat. Okay, you win. Prodding his horse forward, Briac huffed. Use your brains. Dragons have great powers. How can we best use them to achieve what we need? Fading sunlight rimmed the mountaintops as Briac led them into a wide clearing. Connell glanced around the pleasant meadow. Wildflowers undulated in the gentle wind. The cloudless sky above added to the aura of peace. Securing their mounts back down the path, Briac led Connell to the middle of the field. You wait here while I go see if Crag is willing to show himself. Why can't I come along? Briac heaved a sigh of exasperation. Have you not been listening? They don't trust anyone. Just stay here. Okay. Connell watched Briac stalk across the field and disappear into the woods. For some reason, Connell expected an immediate appearance, as though the drag was hiding in the forest at the edge of the meadow. When minutes passed, the daylight began to fade, Connell grew concerned. What if something had happened to Briac? Suppose they were in the wrong place? What if the dragon was hiding somewhere else and was no longer there? Knowing it was futile to go look for him, he debated calling out when a gigantic winged creature filling the darkening sky above him, circling slowly before him, plummeting to the ground to stand towering over Connell, causing him to stumble back. So you're the one, Crag said, his voice rich and resonant. He sat back on his haunches and folded his wings behind him, his tail curling around him. Tell me, human, why should I trust you?
Dragons. All right, that wraps up the reading for this week. So if you are not subscribed, make sure you subscribe so you get the notification when we put up the weekly videos. And we'll see you next week.